So normally I'm pretty positive, at least about Shaman. I try not to make too much negative content. However, I am a bit disappointed with what is happening with the tier sets for Enhance and Ellie Shaman on PTR. Obviously, there's assumedly still going to be changes coming, but as we are less than 2 weeks out from release and they have not yet put out any patch for this week, I am starting to get worried. I think all 3 tier sets for DPS Shaman have huge glaring issues. In this video, I will avoid referencing damage or tuning much and will solely focus on the design. I'll start with the Totemic set. It is completely bugged and has been bugged for an entire month on PTR. I count at least 5 individual bugs. The 2 set is meant to cast a 200% effective Primordial Storm from your totem. It is only a 100% effectiveness Primordial Storm. As you can see, it is doing the same damage as my personal Primordial Storm. The way the 2 set interacts with Maelstrom is very unintuitive and has to be a mistake. The Primordial Storm from the totem does cast with Maelstrom, however, it uses the Maelstrom you have when it procs. So if you use Lava Lash to proc the last mote while on 10 Maelstrom, it will be a 10 Maelstrom Primordial Storm. But if you use a Spender to proc the air mote last, the Spender will first take you down to 0 Maelstrom and then cast a Spender with 0 Maelstrom, meaning the optimal play is to always use air mote first, which is pretty poor gameplay loop and disrupts the flow of Totemic. The Primordial Storm also doesn't seem to be benefiting from Pulse Capacitor or Totemic rebound stacks, however that could be intended. The 4 set is a buff stacking to 2 that causes your next Lava Lash or Fire Nova to cast a second time at 150% effectiveness. You can have 2 stacks of this buff from both of your Primordial Storms, which are each individually consumed, but the second cast is actually 300% effectiveness when cast on 2 stacks, and this is reflected in the tooltip. It should never be 300%, they just doubled the wrong number. And the 150% effectiveness also just doesn't work on Fire Nova. The duplicate does the same damage as the original Fire Nova. Also, the second cast is delayed by about half a second and incurs a cooldown on the spell, so when used on Lava Lash, for example, the cooldown will be about 0.5 seconds longer, which is really bad in hot hands. You can see the spell go on cooldown here and then go on cooldown a second time. Now you might have noticed that everyone on PTR is playing Stormbringer. It's not because Stormbringer is better or anything, it's because Totemic is completely bugged and not really worth testing. It's fine for a class to be bugged on PTR, but for it to remain in this state for over a month is kind of crazy. So the Stormbringer tier isn't bugged. It is functional and it's a fun concept. You get an Ascendance proc after an amount of Awakening Storms procs. It is partially deterministic, sounds great in theory, but from an Enhanced POV, this brings a pretty degenerate gameplay loop. So for Enhance, a lot of the strength of Ascendance is its ramping capability with Tempest. Every Tempest you press gives you a stacking 10% multiplicative damage buff, and when you proc this Ascendance from the tier, you get 2 charges of Tempest straight up. So with the tier set, you have 2 ideal scenarios and 1 really bad scenario. The optimal times to proc your tier is during your real Ascendance because of this stacking buff, and also at the start of a pull to build up momentum. And the absolute worst time to proc your tier is at the very end of a pull where mobs are about to die and you can't make use of it. And the way the tier procs goes off Awakening Storms, which has a chance to proc when you use certain abilities. So the correct play is if you are close to a tier proc at an inopportune time, which is at the end of a pull typically, you must stop using these abilities. These abilities are Storm Strike, Chain Lightning, Lightning Bolt, Tempest, Primordial Storm, which are your main abilities. Aside from that, you can only really use Lava Lash and Crash Lightning, which add up to like 1 mil damage total every 10 seconds. So at the end of every pull, as an Enhancement Shaman in M+, I am going AFK. It's really not fun to not press buttons and just stand there auto-attacking. But it's even less fun to have a mob on 5% health, I Storm Strike it, proc my Ascendance, and then on the next pull I do tank damage until the next proc. Which could potentially be like 40 seconds into the pull, maybe even a minute. And it's also a bit annoying that I can do all that, be on 7 stacks of tier, enter Ascendance, get unlucky, and spend my whole Ascendance not proccing the 8th stack. And also this set is a weak aura nightmare. It's another hidden buff that you can't track outside of a weak aura. It's absolutely mandatory to track, even more so than Tempest. But now I'm tracking 3 different numbers on my progress towards Tempest, Awakening, and tier proc, along with the actual Tempest itself, its duration, its stacks. I'm playing this entire numbers minigame on the side. Now there is also the Tempest munching issue. The tier set gives 2 Tempests when it procs, and it can proc off a Spender. So if you're 10 Maelstrom away from a Tempest, and you press a Chain Lightning which grants you this Tempest, but also procs Awakening Storms and your tier, you will get 3 Tempests in one global. And because Tempest can only stack to 2, you will simply lose a Tempest with no counterplay. Because Awakening is completely random, there is no way to avoid this happening. Now I'm not saying Tempest needs to stack to 3, but maybe when the tier procs, the Tempest you gain from it should exceed the cap or something. And I do wish the tier set would have a more guaranteed interaction. Possibly reaching 8 stacks would cause it to proc on your next Tempest or something. Right now it's very cumbersome and can also cause great variance between keys or pulls. The Stormbringer 4 set is also pretty boring. It's a generic 5% nature damage and generic damage proc you wouldn't notice. I do feel like the 2 set should have been split up across the 2 and 4, but I doubt anything about that will change for now. Also, Stormbringer Enhance is not looking that good for raid single target, and a lot of it is because it's quite unlikely to get your first tier proc in Lust because you start the pull on nothing. Now if we look at the Stormbringer set for Ellie, Ellie, it does have less problems with the holding DPS because at the end of a pull, they can press Lava Burst, Spenders, and Ice Fury Frost Shock without getting Awakening Storms. And also, Ellie doesn't have Rolling Thunder, so their Ascendance and Tempest economy is less momentum based, so the timing of the proc is less relevant. The bigger issue for Ellie is that their tier got nerfed to require 9 Awakening Storms procs. The spec was not top tier in Mythic Plus, definitely not good in Raid, and it copped a massive nerf to the tier for about 40% uptime taken off. This took Ellie to being one of the worst specs for overall damage. Ellie does the same damage as other classes when they press Ascendance, and every so often as Ellie you will have a pool where you don't proc for like a minute and do tank damage. Even if they aura buff Ellie from here, the spec is just less fun and is still inconsistent. And in single target, this set is kind of embarrassing now. It's probably the lowest simming single target spec at a measly 4 mil in BIS, which is 20% behind the Farseer tree, which has its own set that has massive issues. The Farseer 4 set for Ellie is the most useless thing that I have ever seen. It is a buff when you cast Ancestral Swiftness that gives you cast time reduction and CDR on Lava Burst for a measly 8 seconds. It reduces the cast time of your spells by only 25%. This only affects casted spells, does not affect instant spells, does not lower the global cooldown. Ellie Shaman casts a lot of instant spells, and this is encouraged by Farseer ancestors that cast more often when you cast more instant spells. Here is a log from live where you can see there is 1 or 2 casted spells per Ancestral Swiftness window, meaning this tier set is saving maybe 0.5 seconds of casting per Ancestral Swiftness, which would give you 1 extra second of casting per minute. That's probably worth less than 1% haste. You also just have a lot of haste in your Ascendance, so this bonus is pretty much just wasted in your Ascendance, which is where all your damage is. The Lava Burst CDR is also just weak. 50% reduction takes the cooldown from 8 seconds to 4 seconds, which means instead of generating 1 Lava Burst over the 8 seconds, you generate 2, meaning this gives you 2 Lava Bursts every minute, assuming you don't ever cap on them. So every minute you are gaining at most 2 Lava Bursts and 1 extra glow with this 4 set. This is very bad. It sims as a 0.7% increase. For reference, running 2 set from Season 2 with 2 set from Season 3 is a 7% increase, not accounting for eye level. This is beyond the levels of, oh, they will nerf the old 2-piece, because the new one is barely worth running. If you have to sacrifice any eye level at all for the new 4-piece, say you get a piece from LFR or normal, or you have a myth track non-tier that you can't catalyze, or you have a socket head that isn't tier, you'll be better off not equipping the Farseer 4-piece. There's also not really much way to numerically buff this. Even at 100% cast time reduction, this would not affect instance, which is most of your rotation. And even at 100% CDR, you really wouldn't get many more Lava Bursts out. They could increase the duration, but I don't know to what extent they would need to do that for it to be enough. Also, because this tier affects Lava Burst, it also kind of doesn't scale into AoE, which further reinforces this loop where Farseer is only viable in Raid and Stormbringer is only viable in M+. That being said, there are huge issues with Farseer AoE beyond this that have never been fixed, such as the Ancestors Chain Lightning being capped to 3. Now, what's also really weird is last week they minorly buffed Farseer, except they buffed nodes in the Farseer tree itself and did not touch the tier set. These amounted to only a 3% buff, and it's really weird that they would buff the tree before they would buff the set. Now, the Farseer 2-piece is fine, at least to my knowledge. So in summary, the Totemic set is very bugged, the Stormbringer set is very annoying to play around, and the Farseer set is very weak by design. Now, I don't know much about Resto Shaman, so I don't know if these issues persist there. I know Resto Totemic doesn't have all the same bugs. Maybe they have their own issues. I don't know. I'm focusing on DPS in this video, sorry. Now, I was holding off on making this video until the tuning patch this week, but we are on Thursday and we haven't seen any sign of a patch. They actually released dungeon changes with no class changes this week, so I'm getting a bit worried, especially because we are getting very close to release. Hopefully, by the time you watch this video, they will have made some changes, and I will leave something in the comments if they do.